back, friends. We are now going to be spoken to by our second presenter this morning, an equally esteemed member of the Cleveland area, and Dr. Marvin A. McMickle is certainly no stranger to a number of us. Let me say a couple of words by way of introduction. Reverend McMickle was for 24 years the senior pastor of Antioch Baptist Church in Cleveland, Ohio, and has recently retired after 8 further years as president of Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School in Rochester, New York. His Doctor of Ministry degree is from Princeton, and he owns a PhD from Case Western Reserve University, as well as an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Payne Theological Seminary. Along the way, Dr. McMickle has been a professor of homiletics at Ashland Theological Seminary and a visiting professor at Yale Divinity School. He has presided over the Cleveland branches of the NAACP and the Urban League, and has served on boards of education and social justice organizations, including for healthcare victims of HIV/AIDS. He's managed also to find time to write 17 books and dozens of articles on the Christian ministry. Having received numerous awards and honors for his Christian advocacy, Dr. McMickle is currently back home as the interim pastor of Antioch Baptist Church and also as a member of the Cleveland Baptist Association Board of Trustees. The Cleveland Baptist Association proudly presented the Prophetic Voice Award to Dr. McMickle at the CBA Urban Ministry Conference in 2019. Dr. McMickle will speak to us on the topic, From Pulpit to Politics in Today's Political Climate. And likewise, after approximately his 20-minute-long address, we'll provide a brief question and answer period. Dr. McMickle, it is with great anticipation that we also welcome you to our webinar, and God bless you as you bring to us what is on your heart today.
Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to come and share, first of all, with CBA and with my good friend across nearly 50 years, Dr. Otis Moss. It's always a joy to be joined with him in any effort. My thanks go out to the CBA leadership, to Mylan Waite, to Jeff Gordon, and to you also, David Chapman, for your leadership and vision in bringing this event together, and for what looks like almost 100 people who are on the line sharing today. So I'm grateful for the chance to be a part of this. I'm going to try to put something up on the screen, and so if this works, you won't see me. If it doesn't work, then you'll have to look at me for the next little while. But let me just see what I can come up with here. There we go. So what I would like to do is do a quick primer on some of the constitutional and legal issues that need to inform us as we talk about the role of religious institutions getting ready for political events. The first one is to just be sure we understand what the U.S. Constitution really does say. The First Amendment, Congress will make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This is one of the distinguishing factors of American life, is that there is no state religion. There is no religion that we must support with our tax dollars. There is no penalty to us if we do not participate in a religious organization. One of the questions that was raised with Dr. Moss was, what about persons who are not members of any religious organization? The Constitution anticipates that persons who work for purposes of justice and freedom and opportunity may do that for a variety of reasons. One may be religious, one may be out of civic engagement, whatever the case may be. There is no religion that all Americans must observe. Secondly, and I think this is an important question, is that there is no religious test that can ever be required as a qualification for any office in this country. I was in a meeting some years ago here in the Cleveland area for a candidate, and a local pastor asked this person what this person's view of the atonement was. And my question was, I'm not exactly sure how an answer to the atonement is a qualifying issue to become a county commissioner. So we should not necessarily impose our theology or our religious views as a precondition for who gets elected. This is important for our friends who think that matters of the right to life are somehow theologically required in order to hold a public office. Political leaders do not necessarily have to share our religious agenda in order to deserve our vote. That is not my opinion. That is Article 6, Section 3 of the United States Constitution. Two other quick reminders for us as Baptists. Roger Williams, in 1644, in his essay entitled The Bloody Tenet, really introduces the idea of a wall of separation between church and state. That phrase does not appear in the Constitution. People think it does, but it does not appear. It appears first in 1644 with Roger Williams, and then in 1802, it is used again by Thomas Jefferson in what he called a wall of separation between church and state. So that's just a quick reminder of some of the legal issues that we have to consider as we go forward. Here's a quote from Stephen Prothero in his book, Religious Literacy, in which he says, thanks to the Establishment Clause, Congress shall pass no law regarding the establishment of religion. Thanks to the Establishment Clause, American government is secular by law. Thanks to the Free Exercise Clause, American society is religious by choice. We are not a Christian nation, and we were never meant to be a Christian nation. We are a secular society governed by a secular document. And so thanks to the Establishment Clause, our government is secular by law, but we are religious by choice. In other words, persons can adhere to any religious tradition that they choose or none at all. They can be Baptist, they can be Lutheran, they can be Christian, they can be Jewish, they can be Muslim, they can be Hindu. They can follow any of the African traditional religions. That is a matter of our personal choice. Moving right along, there are some things that we cannot do thanks to the 1954 IRS tax code. I invite all of you, before you get too involved in any political activity, to be mindful of what the IRS tax codes allow and prohibit under the so-called Johnson Amendment. This is Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was the president that Dr. Moss referred to, who passed or helped to pass a law while he was in the U.S. Senate that put restrictions on what churches and congregations can do. And I'm going to come to those in just a few minutes, in order to be politically active without losing your tax exempt status. So we'll come back to that in a moment. I'm going to skip that one and go on down to the next one. I want to start with this little history of African Americans and their involvement in the political process. I want to start with the Reconstruction Act of 1867, which is the first time that African Americans were actually allowed to vote in some numbers. All African American men were allowed to vote after the 15th Amendment in 1870, but even before that, because of the Reconstruction Act, there were opportunities for Black men to vote. I remind you all, Black women could not vote even after the 15th Amendment, and were not allowed to vote until the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. And even then, most of them could not vote because of state restrictions. And so it was the 1965 Voting Rights Act that allowed for African Americans to begin to vote. So we have been voting as a bloc for less than 60 years. Most of us on this Zoom call were alive when the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. And most of us should remember that along with African Americans, Native Americans were also allowed to vote as a result of that. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is one of the most important events in the history of our country. But of course, no sooner were voting rights established than voter suppression began. The one thing I'm most concerned about in the upcoming election are various attempts at voter suppression. Dr. Moss made reference to the year of 1877 and the compromise between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden, when Rutherford B. Hayes was elected on the promise that if he were made president, he would withdraw all federal troops from the states that were occupied by the Union Army after the Civil War, essentially return the South into the hands of the Confederate soldiers who had fought so hard to keep Black people in slavery. State legislatures then went to work to overturn any of the effects of the 15th Amendment, and voter suppression of the Black vote began, and that suppression took a multitude of forms, but they happened under what is a strange theological term. I hope you appreciate that when we use the word redemption as theologians and pastors, we're talking about redemption from sin and second chances by the grace of God. When the white Southerners of the 19th century and the early 20th century used the word redemption, it was almost their version of Make America Great Again. They wanted to redeem the South from the Reconstruction. They wanted to redeem the South from Black voter participation. They wanted to redeem the South from the notion that Black people could ever become fully human in that culture. And they took this wonderful theological term called redemption and turned it into this ugly form. So friends, every time, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, every time you hear someone talk about MAGA and Make America Great Again, you have to ask yourself, what is the again? All of us want to make America great. I don't have any objection to making America great. I think it already is a great country, has always been a great country, but is always in the process of becoming an even better country. So going forward is, I think, how we should proceed. But to make it great again suggests there was a time in the past to which we want to return in order to regain our greatness. Somebody asked our current president when that again was. And he said he would like to take the country back to 1958, when Dwight Eisenhower was the president and before the civil rights movement reached its fullest stride. Or let's go back to the year that Dr. Moss mentioned, 1955, and the murder of Emmett Till in just outside of Money, Mississippi. And somebody once asked Trent Lott, who was the U.S. Senate majority leader from Mississippi, they asked him, when was the golden age of America? Now note the tense. When was the golden age of America? And Trent Lott said, America was never better than it was in Mississippi in 1955. The same year that Emmett Till was shot, had the motor of a cotton gin tied around his neck with strips of barbed wire, thrown into a riverbank and left covered in mud. And when they found his body, he was so bloated and disfigured, only by a ring on his finger could his mother determine that it really was her son. And when they wanted to have a closed casket because the sight of him was so hard to look at, she insisted on an open casket funeral so the country could see what happened when white people in the South tried to redeem the country from Black participation. Keep that word redemption in mind every time you hear the phrase, make America great again. What were the forms of voter suppression then in the late 19th, early 20th century? Physical intimidation, threats of physical violence, poll taxes that would prevent you from being able to vote if you didn't post a dollar amount. Now, it might be for us a small amount, $10, $15, $20. But if you are a black sharecropper living in Georgia in 1895, you don't have $10 to post in order to go and make a vote. You do know, I hope, that today in Florida, they passed a law that said it is all right for ex-offenders to vote again in Florida. That was the law of a federal judge. The state legislature then came behind it and said, yes, but they have to pay certain taxes and fees to re-register to vote. And so right now in 2020 in the state of Florida, poll taxes are being reimposed. There were literacy tests. You might have seen this in movies and TV shows. The question would be, can you read and interpret to the satisfaction of the registrar portions of your state constitution? There were grandfather clauses. You could vote in Louisiana in 1890 if your grandfather could vote in Louisiana in 1890. There were vagrancy laws, which meant that if you did not have a job, if you were not involved in some reason for being in a certain place, then you could be arrested and therefore you would not be able to vote. I want to introduce you to a book called Origins of the Civil Rights Movement by a man named Alden Morris, in which he talks about the tripartite forms of oppression. They have not gone away. The first one, he says, is keep people in as much poverty as you possibly can so that they are so busy trying to stay alive, they don't have much time left for any political or public activity. Keep them in poverty. Secondly, keep them in a state of political powerlessness. Keep them so that they cannot vote, or if they can, as Dr. King often said about voting in the North, Black people in the South could not vote. Black folk in the North had no one they felt they could vote for who would make a difference. How do you enforce the first two? You use physical intimidation. Understand that while Donald Trump is talking about Antifa and anti-fascist people who are coming to these rallies all across the country, all of the killings that have happened, all of the shootings have in some sense been precipitated by acts of intimidation coming from right-wing persons who are bringing rifles. I wish a group of Black people would have stormed the Michigan state capitol earlier this year with semi-automatic weapons, demanding, in Donald Trump's words, to liberate Michigan from restrictions brought on by COVID-19. Did you see that image of about 200 armed white men with rifles on their shoulders shouting in the faces of Michigan State Patrol officers to have the great inconvenience of being put into a self-quarantine condition because of COVID-19? Suppose 200 Black men had stormed the Michigan State Capitol with automatic rifles. One, what would Fox News have said about that? And two, how long before the Michigan State Patrol would have put all of them in jail for carrying those guns? What are some 21st century acts of voter suppression? Well, one, they're trying to put limits on early voting so that you can't vote as early as might have been the case in previous elections. They're trying to limit absentee voting. You've heard your president talk about the unreliability of mail-in voting, even though he himself and his vice president and William Barr and almost all of the Republican governors vote absentee. They're trying to restrict same-day registration. They're trying to prevent Sunday voting. They want to change polling place locations. They're closing locations. Imagine Cuyahoga County, as big as it is, if you want to do mail-in or early voting, you have to bring that ballot to one drop box in the parking lot of the Board of Election on 30th and Euclid. So suppose you live someplace 10, 15, 20 miles away, but you want to drop off your ballot for early voting. You got to get in a car and come to 30th and Euclid in order to drop it off. Whereas in other states across the country, they have hundreds of voting locations. But guess what? Those other states are not considered swing states in this election. So you watch every one of these Midwestern swing states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, you watch all the attempts at voter suppression that are going to be going on in order to prevent people from voting in this upcoming election. I remind you again, the election is not going to be won or lost in 50 states. It's going to be won or lost in about 5, maybe 6 contentious states. That is where you want to keep your eye on the prize in terms of any forms of voter suppression or voter trickery. I want to remind you that there's a long history of African Americans holding public office, and that we ought to be aware of how long this is going on. One of the really interesting things about the Black church in politics is that in 1869, there was an African American Methodist preacher named Hiram Revels, R-E-V-E-L-S. And he'd been a recruiter for the Union Army to recruit regiments of Black soldiers. But in 1867, he was elected to the Mississippi state legislature under the Reconstruction Act. In 1869, now this is before the 15th Amendment, when you could still become a senator by vote of your state legislature. He became the United States Senator from Mississippi, a Black Methodist preacher, in 1869. Now, you'll never guess whose seat Hiram Revels filled when he became a United States Senator from Mississippi in 1869. The last person to hold that seat was Jefferson Davis, who became the president of the Confederate States of America. So you talk about irony. Jefferson Davis leaves the Union with Mississippi to become the head of the Confederacy when the state is readmitted, talking now about Dr. Moss's earlier presentation, how sometimes evil moves in one direction, but God begins to move in another. The very next person after Jefferson Davis to hold that seat was a Black preacher named Hiram Revels. Please look at this number 11, page 11 listing. There were 2,000 Black elected officials in this country between 1870 and 1890. Did anybody ever tell you that? Between 1870 and 1890, there were more than 2,000 Black elected officials. 200 of them were clergy. And by 1920, because of voter suppression, that number went from 2,000 to under 20. That was the redemption, friends. That was what they were trying to redeem, to reduce the number of Black people involved in the political process. And they did that, to quote Malcolm X, by any means necessary. All right, what are the things that you can do to be an active congregation in the upcoming election? I talk about activist churches. I hope that each one of you commits to being an activist church in the upcoming election. What would it look like if you did? Well, you'd be involved aggressively in voter registration activities. Your church can be a site where voter registration takes place. You can either invite folks to come, you can go out. Now, this is trickier, obviously, in the time of COVID-19, but be sure, even in your mailings and in your newsletters, that you are encouraging people to participate in voter registration activities. Your church can sponsor candidate forums, even by Zoom, for every level of government. Remember that the only person running for this office is not for the presidency. There are people who are running for judges, they're running for school boards, they're running for local, state, county, and national offices. Please try to help your people know who is running and for what office. If you want to do a Souls to the Polls campaign, to use your church as a place where persons can come together. Now, again, this is harder to do, but if you've got a church bus that seats 50 people, you can take 10 at a time down to vote or to register, as the case may be. You can all sign candidate petitions if somebody asks you to help them get on the ballot. Nothing at all wrong with doing that. And of course, you can endorse issues. You can't endorse candidates, but you can endorse issues, health and human services issues, issues involving the maintenance of the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District and the water systems and that kind of thing. Here is what you cannot do. You cannot endorse, you as a pastor or as a church, you cannot make a public endorsement of a candidate from the pulpit of your church without at least running the risk of being reported and risking your tax exempt status. Now, Black preachers over the years have known this to be true, but have been creative in how they get around this. Myron Waite knows how creative Antioch has been over the years in dancing as close to the edge of this restriction as we can. But we dance pretty close to the edge of it. So I'm going to just simply say to you, be careful how you do it, but I won't tell you not to do it. I'll just tell you, you got to find a way to do it so that it doesn't become conspicuous that you've taken a stand. Who you invite to the church, who you have stand up, the names you do or do not speak, all speak volumes. Some years ago, there was a Black person running for the Senate in North Carolina. And we were all very excited about that. I think his name was Harvey Gantt. We made the mistake of taking up an offering for Harvey Gantt, which we then sent on an Antioch Baptist Church check. He sent it back with thanks and told us to apply to some of the fund because he could not receive a check that came from a religious institution. So we had to be careful about that. You can't post partisan campaign literature on the church grounds. You can distribute it. You just can't post it in your front lawn, or you can't post it in the window of your church. And you cannot send out any mailings that support a candidate that uses your church's letterhead or logo. Now, here's why we have to be careful. There has become an enormously close connection, almost too close to tell the difference, between the so-called white conservative evangelical Christians, and I use every word of that with caution, and today's Republican Party. It is sometimes hard to tell where one starts and the other stops. I would rather call them white conservatives who happen to be marginally Christian, but not at all evangelical. Evangelical for me means you believe in the authority of Scripture, you believe in the divinity of Jesus, you believe in the fallen nature of humanity, you believe that redemption in its original term can happen through the blood of Jesus Christ, and you believe in the global mission of the church to spread the gospel to every nation. That's not what these conservative evangelicals today believe. They have views on abortion. They have views on human sexuality. They have views on democratic policies. They have views on immigration. They have views on things that have absolutely nothing to do with the historic nature of the term evangelical. I am an evangelical in the traditional sense of the word. I certainly am not an evangelical in the Franklin Graham, Tony Perkins, and Lord help him, Jerry Falwell Jr. sense of the word. Poor soul. A book came out not long ago that said everything that Donald Trump touches dies. Ask Jerry Falwell Jr. about that. Everything that Donald Trump touches dies. There he is. This is the president, by the way, of Stormy Daniels. This is the president who was using the Ukrainian government to dig up dirt on Joe Biden. This is the president who said, I am the chosen one. I want you to be mindful of a man named Robert Jeffress, pastor of the 14,000 member First Baptist Church of Dallas, Texas, who said that if Donald Trump was impeached, it would result in a civil war. Donald Trump is a Christian warrior because he is pro-life, pro-religious liberty, pro-Israel, and pro-conservative judiciary. This is what conservative white Christians are saying. Donald Trump is a Christian warrior. Really? Only God could deliver such a savior to our nation, said Donald Trump's 2016 campaign chairman, Brad Parscale. I think God calls all of us to fill different roles at different times. I think God wanted Donald Trump to become president, said former White House press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders. God sent Donald Trump to protect the Jewish people from Iran, says Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Donald Trump is doing God's work, said Donald Trump's chosen pastor, Paula White. Really? If you want this kind of theology and this kind of politics, then either vote for Trump or don't vote at all. But if that's not who you think you are, then, you know, you got to do what you've got to do. I want to give you a biblical analogy for the political process in which we are engaged and for the role of Christians at this time in history. And I'm going to stop with this. In the book of Amos, there were really two prophets. One prophet was Amaziah. Amaziah essentially was this conservative evangelical community that was in lockstep with the political authorities. And Amaziah essentially worked for Jeroboam. And when Amos came to preach, Amaziah said to Amos, you cannot preach like that here because this is the king's temple and this is the king's court. And you have to go back to where you came from and preach this kind of radical message where you came from. Amos responded by saying, I am not a prophet nor a prophet's son, meaning I'm not a prophet like you are a prophet. I don't get my paycheck from the king. I work for a higher authority who sent me here. And so I think that the Christian church in the 21st century has to ask itself, in the face of political activities, do we more closely identify ourselves with Amaziah? And you can't tell the difference between us and the ruling governmental policy. Or are we more closely aligned with Amos, who is trying to call us back to the covenant of faith? Let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. I'm trying so hard to find my footing among the Amoses of the world. I'm trying so hard to be differentiated from the Amaziahs. I hope that all of us, as we continue our work, will do the same. In 1934, Karl Barth and other Christians signed something called the Barmen Declaration, in which they said that the religion that was being propagated by the Nazis that put Adolf Hitler at the head of both church and state was an abomination. The only Lord that we have in our lives is the Lord of Scripture. What's at stake, friends, at this point in time is who is Lord? Christ or Caesar? And we have to make up our minds about that today. And I'll stop right there. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. McMickle, for sharing with us once again. Those of us who have heard you more than once know that you have never disappointed, and we thank you for your work, your prophetic words, and so forth. I am always thankful when someone reminds us that our battle, our fight, has been going on for a long time. We cannot choose not to choose. And even the prophet Amos, perhaps some of the earliest scriptures of our Bible, was involved in a fight right there in the king's court. And our fight continues, we should not consider it then to be strange times when our fight continues. And I thank you for that reminder. We will, and both you and Dr. Moss have received several thank yous in our chat room. And so I pass those on just as a group for your bringing us these words. I also remind our folks that we'll take a couple of questions for Dr. McMickle now. Let me start with this one, Dr. McMickle. Someone has asked, is there a way, or are there any restrictions, rather, on us collecting people's sealed ballots and delivering them to the collection box? And I'm guessing that means that for folks who are having a hard time getting out, as you mentioned, maybe someone's 30 miles away from that receptacle box there on 30th and Euclid. Are there restrictions on, say, someone like me or others collecting these ballots that are sealed from others and then delivering them to the collection box?
There was a discussion about that very question involving Cuyahoga County earlier this week, and they were trying to draw a very close distinction between filling a ballot out for someone or simply carrying them to the drop box. And the question was, how many of these can you take? Have they all been sealed so that there's no opportunity for the carrier to tamper with the ballot on the way to the drop box? This is where I think the fear of voter intimidation gets some rootage. Let's say that, because this happened in North Carolina with the Republican election in the congressional district, where a man was, the term they used was harvesting ballots. But then he was only delivering the ones that he was relatively sure would be to the advantage of the candidate who was working with him. So I think they were offering some caution. The safest thing to do is to take it yourself. The safest thing to do is to send it back well in advance if you ask for an absentee ballot, which my wife and I have done. My plan, in my case, is to hand carry it to the Board of Election, put it in the drop box, and know that it is there. I don't want to say that it is illegal to harvest and carry many ballots with you. I'll just say that would give some people some concern that the same thing that happened in North Carolina could be happening. That is, that you're harvesting them, and who's to say that you were given that number of ballots and not 3 times more, and you decided to just bring the ones that you wanted to bring. It opens the door, I think, to some concerns, even if they're unfounded. I would urge folks to make every effort to either mail them back or bring them back, just out of an abundance of caution.
Certainly. Caution is the word of the day on a lot of levels. Thank you for that answer. We have another question, and this is about sort of more toward the body politic, but what would you say, Dr. McMickle, to the Christian who is willing to support and vote for someone like President Trump simply because he walks in front of a church with a Bible or says he is against gay marriage or is pro-life?
I want to say this as delicately as I can, mindful of the audience. You've got to weigh the character of Donald Trump on the whole. Holding a Bible upside down in front of St. John Episcopal Church happened only after he tear gassed and used the National Guard to clear a path of peaceful demonstrators so that he could have a photo opportunity. Now, if he had read from the Bible, if he'd gone into St. John's Church to pray for the confusion that's going on in the country, largely caused by his policies, or if he had said something to the protesters. He even pepper sprayed or had the pastor of that church pepper sprayed in order to get her out of the way so that he could do this photo op. Donald Trump is the last person in the world that folks ought to use as a way of measuring what is Christian conduct. He is not, by the way, as Michael Cohen points out in his most recent book, he is not really pro-life and never has been. He is pro-choice. He is pro-life by convenience in order to hold on to this evangelical vote. My concern is people who vote for Donald Trump despite him because they want to get these conservative judges appointed. This is why they've all said we're going to hold our nose and vote for Donald Trump, because we want Supreme Court judges who will then overturn Roe v. Wade. I do not know what anybody's view of Roe v. Wade is on this call. I will just tell you 70% of the country is in support of a woman's right to choose. She doesn't necessarily have to choose abortion. It is a woman's right with her physician to choose what will happen to her body. How can you be for small government in some areas, but for a government large enough to intrude into your most intimate decisions on the other hand? The hypocrisy of this discussion is so mind-blowing. I don't have the vocabulary for it. Dr. Moss probably does. It escapes me completely how any Christian can look at the life of Donald Trump and see the life, the model, the mind, the heart, the spirit of Jesus anywhere, in anything. I can't believe a word he says. He's lied 20,000 times, according to the New York Times. He lied 200 times in his acceptance speech 2 weeks ago because a fact checker, no, he lied 20 times in that speech by count of a fact checker. How do you listen and believe anything he says if every other word is a lie? I don't know. Nobody ever called Jesus a liar. They said he was full of the devil because he was telling too much truth. They never called him a liar. They didn't call Paul a liar. They didn't call John the Baptist a liar. They didn't call Martin King a liar. They didn't like what he said, but he wasn't lying. How do we support somebody who's lied to us 20,000 times? Beats me.
Thank you. And it strikes me the examples you just gave of the non-liars all stood on the truth and paid with the price of their lives.
Yeah.
There is a critical difference too. Let's take one last question that has been asked of you, Dr. McMickle. And one of our viewers has asked, can you say something about the history of this law and order, quote unquote, campaign, the emphasis on law and order? Any thoughts about that?
Well, the first person, and Dr. Moss may want to help me with this, but the first person that I know of who made law and order a mantra was the police chief and maybe part-time mayor of Miami back in the late 1960s. It then became part of George Wallace's presidential campaigns in the early 70s. It was picked up by Richard Nixon in his 68 and 72 campaigns. And law and order always means, essentially, how do you suppress the public protests that are going on that sometimes become disruptive for the status quo? I live in Chicago during 1968 when the Democratic convention was in session. I saw law and order at work in Chicago when Richard Daley unleashed the Chicago Police Department on nonviolent protesters in Grant Park, and the National Guard came out. I saw tanks inside of Grant Park, right across the street from the hotel where the convention was being held. It's not law and order they want. It is redemption. It is a restoration of the status quo to their advantage. Or to quote this wonderful new book by Isabel Wilkerson called Caste, they want to maintain people of a certain caste in their place so that nobody ever rises beyond the point where the established authorities want them to go. Law and order is just a byword for keeping people in their place, and a promise to the white population of America that if you elect me, I will keep people in their place. It is the anxiety of a white society that begins to find out that its population majority is slipping away, and that whiteness unto itself is no longer a guarantee of success in America. It's a complex answer, but I think it speaks to the question.
Thank you for addressing that. It occurs to me that perhaps law and order belongs in the same lexicon as redemption on that.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we are coming to the close.
Let me just say, it is Donald Trump redeeming America from Barack Obama. That's the best way to think about it. It is Donald Trump's redemption is how do we get the country back? That's why everything that Obama has tried to do, Trump has tried to undo. And everything that Obama achieved, like the Nobel Prize, Trump wants to match. So he gets people to falsely nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. Today's New York Times says twice now he has been falsely nominated. Who in their right mind would nominate Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize? But Obama's got it. Martin King has got it. How can these two black men have it and he doesn't have it? So, so vote for that if that's what you want to vote for. But that's what you're voting for, redemption.
It occurs to me that the dragon and the beast in the book of the Apocalypse also tried to mimic and copy the Holy Trinity of God.
Yeah.
So a very, very fascinating a piece of theology. Well, we've come to the end. I hate closing this. I'm so enjoying the remarks that we have heard from you, Dr. Moss, and you, Dr. McMickle. We thank you again so much for being our dual keynote speakers here, and the visions and the memories and the hopes that you've shared. But we do now come to the end of this broadcast online. And I want to turn things over now back to our executive minister, Dr. Yvonne Carter.
Thank you, David. And let me add my thanks, Dr. Moss and Dr. McMickle, beyond our expectations. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your encouragement. And before we go, just to reseal what you both have taught us so powerfully today, I'd like to share with our audience that CBA is so committed to helping to get out the vote that we have in fact ordered some masks, COVID-19 masks, to be printed with it's probably backwards for you, but the actual mask says, "Vote 2020, your voice matters." Thank you. We did order 2,000 of these. Several of our churches that have the ability to do mass distribution in their communities have taken quantities from 250 to 500 of the mass to distribute. We do have about another 500 on reserve for one of our churches, but that leaves us still about 250 to 300 masks that are available. They are individually wrapped to maintain sterility. So when a person gets one of these masks, it will be sterile. And we would like to encourage everyone to wear it, be an advertisement, if you will, for the critical nature of this vote in 2020. So I'll ask Jeff if you would be so kind to enter into the chat. Anyone who wants to email me at my email address, carteryvonne@cbacleveland.org, or you can also text me at 216-780-4768. Let me know if you would like a quantity of these masks to distribute, and we would be happy to get them to you. Finally, before we let you go, and we know we promised you an hour and a half and we're a little over the time, there are a few upcoming events that we would like to make you aware of. First of all, save the date for November 14th for the tentative next Quarterly Training Institute. We're hoping that we will be able to continue getting these live seminars to you, if not in person. Reminding you that the CBA website at cbacleveland.org has a lot of information on upcoming programs and ministries. The Ohio Leadership Academy is now enrolling for our classes for clergy and church leaders that will begin in November. And also our youth enrichment program, which is an after-school program. We have found a way to go virtual. Starting next Tuesday, we will be holding a virtual after-school program for students in the greater Cleveland area. So we are pleased and honored to be able to offer these ministries and these programs. And we thank you for your participation. Thank you for coming on today. And I've already started seeing some of the donations starting to drop in through our Donate Now link on our website. So thank you so much. God bless you. And after the closing prayer, please hold on for just one more 2 or 3 seconds. Jeff is going to throw up a poll so that we can get some feedback from you in terms of what else you would like to see in this regard. So great and gracious God, we thank you for this time. We thank you for this day. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you for your grace and your mercy. We thank you for your leaders. We thank you for the voices, Lord, of Dr. Moss and Dr. McMickle, who are so strong and so powerful, leading your people to do what is right in your eyes. And so now, Lord, we do pray that you will go with us, with everyone who has been on this call. Lead us through the rest of our day. Bless us and keep us, we pray. In Jesus' powerful name. Amen.